Back in 2002, this California film crew would go missing in Antarctica. But what they may have discovered in the process is the subject of controversy still to this day. At the time, new updated satellite imagery had the entire world buzzing, as it was picking up anomalies all over Antarctica. This, coupled with the fact that military personnel were reporting that the US government was flying equipment down there, had the Atlantis TV production crew intrigued. So the team decided to go on an expedition to see what types of discoveries they could get on film. Once there, it wasn't long after they cleared the ice wall that they disappeared. Officials would waste no time. They'd call the Navy SEALs in to track them down. They'd never locate the film crew, but they'd discover something else. In an old supply dump near Russian Vostok Research Station, they would locate a tape. And it is said that when the SEALs played the footage, they were awestruck. And it was at that moment the missing team was no longer priority. Check out part 2 to find out what the team got on film. Like and follow part 2 immediately after. After finding the tape left behind by the missing crew, the SEAL team would take it to the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station to watch it. And according to researchers working there at the time, the SEALs were awestruck after watching the tape. It showed evidence of a dig up to 2 miles below the Antarctica shelf. Not only that, but it provided video evidence of massive megaliths way below the ice. And though researchers said the SEAL team couldn't disclose much more, it is believed that they may have even found one of the greatest mysteries of all time, the city of Atlantis. So the controversy surrounding it. Atlantis TV station lawyers proceeded to try and get the tape back from the government. They planned on airing it to the public, but that's where the government said, no way. And even though their lawyers pressed the issue, they were never able to get the footage. And now Gov officials even deny its existence. So the battle for the video evidence still persists today. And unfortunately, they never found the missing. Back in 2002, this California film crew would go missing in Antarctica. But what they may have discovered in the process is the subject of controversy still to this day. At the time, new updated satellite imagery had the entire world buzzing, as it was picking up anomalies all over Antarctica. This, coupled with the fact that military personnel were reporting that the US government was flying equipment down there, had the Atlantis TV production crew intrigued. So the team decided to go on an expedition to see what types of discoveries they could get on film. Once there, it wasn't long after they cleared the ice wall that they disappeared. Officials would waste no time. They'd call the Navy SEALs in to track them down. They'd never locate the film crew, but they'd discover something else. In an old supply dump near Russian Vostok Research Station, they would locate a tape. And it is said that when the SEALs played the footage, they were awestruck. And it was at that moment the missing team was no longer priority. Check out part 2 to find out what the team got on film. Like and follow part 2 immediately after. Alright fam, you're going to want to stop scrolling for this one. Check this out. This is a map of the United States Geological Survey. And what they do is they map out all the earthquakes throughout the entire world and track them. But as I was looking at it, I noticed obviously the frequency happening in Alaska and the United States, but then I noticed something really peculiar. Do me a favor and take a look at Antarctica. Notice how absolutely massive it is. I mean, here's what it looks like on Google Earth, much smaller than both South America and Africa, barely covering any ground, to the official USGS website portraying it as literally going around the entirety of the world. Now in this picture you can see, they have it covering the entire Western Hemisphere. And here's the Eastern Hemisphere. They have it covering the entirety of it. Now this is crazy to me. So down the rabbit hole I went, and what I found absolutely blows my mind. See, flat earthers were onto something, but where they go wrong is assuming that the earth is only as big as they portray. It's actually much, much larger, and a part of something even bigger yet. This is known as the Atlantean Conspiracy and the Masonic Mystery of 33. It's the belief that we are surrounded by an ice wall, and that once beyond this ice wall, a whole new world awaits, including up to 33 continents. From elaborate German bases with super advanced technology, to places like Agartha, discovered by Admiral Byrd in 1947 on Operation High Jump. I always wondered why they called it Operation High Jump. But that's just the beginning of the story. There's a lot more to go. Once beyond the first ice wall, there's up to 6 more continents. These continents harbor descendants of the 13 bloodlines. The 13 bloodlines include names like Rothschild, Rockefeller, or even Kennedy. And if you look back throughout history, There are many members that have died premature deaths, either by murder or just passing away. It is believed that they did not in fact die at all. They just went beyond the ice wall. See, the elites have known about this the whole time. They keep us in the dark by simply altering the world map. I mean, thinking about it, how easy would it be? We really have no way of fact-checking any of this. And there's really been no civilian expeditions allowed to go to either of the poles for years. In 2011 they tried, but people that were part of the expedition started disappearing. So other than the occasional subtle hint like the Illuminati being obsessed with 33, or once in a great while witnessing multiple suns, it would be easy to hide the fact that ancient alien civilizations live on all these continents, and that it's part of something that's bigger than we ever imagined. In the early 1990s, this team of Navy SEALs was called to Western North Carolina. Their mission was to neutralize a creature that was behind a family gone missing in the Appalachian Mountains. The following is a first-hand account of one of the team members. After being sanctioned by an alphabet government agency, they were to fly out the next morning. When they were first briefed on the target, they would literally laugh out loud. They all thought this has got to be a joke, but they would soon find out it was the furthest thing from it. After being shown multiple pictures of victims who were attacked, this SEAL team member would look over at his closest friend and fellow teammate. He was of Native American descent and he looked pale white. He sent chills down his spine as he mumbled, "This isn't good at all." They would arrive the next day via chopper. As they landed, they seen the local sheriff waiting to welcome them. "I haven't been this happy to see the cavalry since Korea," he would say. He would take them through town showing the damage done by what he called the hairy demons. From trash buildings to disappearing families. After getting as much intel as they could from the sheriff, he would show them an old deer path. "Follow this, you'll find them," he explained, and they set out on their mission. As they were making their way up the side of the Appalachian Mountains, their Native American team member would tell them a story. "When I was young, my grandfather used to tell me all about them. How as a young man, he and his brothers would go on hunts. He would call the beasts wild men. They would harass our villages and take our children. Now I understand why he would never let me out at night," he explained. It was around 1400 hours when they would find their first track. Then they began seeing sign everywhere. They soon figured out that there were 7 of them total, and they began tracking them diligently. It was about 1930 hours and dark had just began to fall. That's when the point man would stop dead in his tracks and speak into his headset. You could hear the adrenaline in his voice. "Sir, I see one, and it's huge." "If you have the shot, take it," said the lieutenant. As he squeezed the trigger, the shot pierced the night silence. The 7.62mm round hit the beast square in the chest. It let out a fierce roar and acted as if it was nothing but a mosquito. Suddenly, all 7 of them began attacking at once. The beast moved throughout the forest with amazing agility. They were so quick you could barely see them, making them extremely hard to hit. Then out of nowhere, one of their teammates lets out a deathly scream. They look back as he's being pulled up into a tree. As they were fighting, one of the lieutenant's superiors would radio in, asking him to catch one alive. "Not a fucking chance," the lieutenant would reply. They would battle the beast for a couple days, killing the last one on the 3rd night. Soon after, they would find the bodies of the missing family and their teammate, or what was left of them, as the beast had been eating them. Next day, they were told to stay quiet. They'd say their teammate died during training. Over 20 have died from training in the area since. Witness accounts of run-ins with the Wendigo. The first encounter takes us to Brunswick, Canada, near Grand Lake. This gentleman posted a story on Reddit in 2015, stating that he and his wife had bought the cabin the summer before. Their nearest neighbor was a mile away, and the cabin was located in dense forest. They spent most of the summer renovating the place, preparing for their first winter, which would prove to be one of the worst. And it wasn't just the record-breaking cold or the whiteout snowfall. The husband would end up having the most terrifying encounter of his life. It was a particularly cold night on the 24th of January 2015 when the homeowner's dog woke him up around 2 a.m. Figuring she must need to go outside to go to the bathroom, he gets up, leaves his wife sleeping, and lets the dog out. But as soon as he lets her out, she bolts to the wood line. And though he was yelling at her to stop, she acted like she didn't even hear him. She was on a mission. Irritated, he throws his boots and coat on and walks to the edge of the woods. He can hear his dog growling as she crashes through the dense brush. Next part. He stands at the edge of the woods, yelling for her, while shining his flashlight. He can hear her growling, crashing through the dense brush about 30 feet in. Then suddenly, the sound stops. What the hell, he thought? At this point, he was starting to feel uneasy. Sadie, come here, girl. Come on. Nothing. He spots their tracks and begins to follow them, and about 30 feet in, he stops. I felt like I was being watched, he proclaimed. And no sooner did he stop, he hears a voice behind him. Babe! Babe! Thinking his wife must have got out of bed, he turns around, but there's nobody there. Then once again, he hears a voice behind him. Babe! Babe, are you there? He turns around. What the fuck is going on? Then a branch breaks. He quickly shines his light where the noise was and notices something. What is that? He shines his light a little bit more. That's when a tall humanoid figure stands up and lets out a screech. He bolts out of the woods and there she is waiting. 3. These are real witness encounters with the Wendigo. This is the account of Charles Chuck Latimer, Michigan outdoorsman and hunter. His story would be published in the 14 Times magazine around the year 2000. Chuck was an avid hunter from Delta County, Michigan. Being that he was born in 1939, Chuck was experienced. His favorite place to hunt was Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was there in 1983 when he would go on a hunt that would change him forever. It was about midday when Mr. Latimer was stalking a buck he had spotted early that morning. He would follow his tracks for a half a mile when he would step into a clearing, and there he was. Chuck would pull up his rifle and take the shot. Oh shit. He instantly knew he put a bad shot on him. Instead of hitting the buck where he planned, he hit about 3 inches low. Regardless, he knew the deer would eventually succumb to his wounds. The deer would end up running about 100 yards back into the woods. He would follow the track about 10 feet in when he would spot the deer. But then he spotted something moving behind it. He would take a couple more steps towards it when something would pop its head up. He couldn't believe what he saw. It was a humanoid figure with black eyes. The beast would then take stance over the deer as if protecting his food and let out a loud screech. Chuck no sooner saw this when he turned around and ran. His son Andrew would tell his story and explain that his father would only tell this story to certain people. And after his experience, he never hunted alone again. It affected him so much that on his deathbed, he told it one more time. You may not believe, but the people telling these stories do. Check out my YouTube for more videos. Real zombies in World War I? You heard it here first. This is the Attack of the Dead Men. The battle would take place at Auschwitz Fortress, built by the Russian Empire in the 19th century to fend off future German attacks. The Germans' first attempt on the stronghold, fall of 1914, would be held off by Russian artillery. The second attack would take place 6 months later. This time they would use 420mm cannons. After barraging the fortress for days, they would confidently execute a full-scale attack and again be held off. Months later, now under the command of Field Marshal von Hindenburg, the Germans would take a new approach. The new general would use poisonous gas, knowing the Russians had no masks. On the morning of August 6, 1915, they would deploy 30 cannons and 30 gas batteries. With the wind in their favor, the green smog would roll towards the Russians. The fog of chlorine and bromine would kill all the grass and turn all the leaves on the trees black. As it lifted, the Germans would move in, not knowing the terror they were about to face. They slowly made their approach, quickly noticing the eerie stillness from the Russian side. The Germans had just sent poisonous gas to the Russian side. They put on their masks and began walking. As they approached, they noticed an eerie quiet coming from their opposer's side. They get within about 50 yards of the fortress, and that's when they first hear it. Their hair stands up on the back of their neck, and a chill crawls down their spine. At this point, they knew it was too late. Attack! The last of the 9th through 12th Infantry gives it everything they have. Their faces sagging and oozing black fluid. Their eyes bloodshot red as they're coughing up pieces of their lungs. Some of them were even reported as running through bullets. The German army was stunned. They didn't know what to think as all the dead men barreled towards them. And as the front line sees Russians running through bayonets seemingly possessed, they quickly retreat. They were so terrified, they were literally getting caught in their own wire traps, trampling one another. The battle would take place at Auschwitz Fortress, built by the Russian Empire in the 19th century to fend off future German attacks. The Germans' first attempt on the stronghold, fall of 1914, would be held off by Russian artillery. The second attack would take place 6 months later. This time they would use 420mm cannons. After barraging the fortress for days, they would confidently execute a full-scale attack and again be held off. Months later, now under the command of Field Marshal von Hindenburg, the Germans would take a new approach. The new general would use poisonous gas, knowing the Russians had no masks. On the morning of August 6, 1915, they would deploy 30 cannons and 30 gas batteries. With the wind in their favor, the green smog would roll towards the Russians. The fog of chlorine and bromine would kill all the grass and turn all the leaves on the trees black. As it lifted, the Germans would move in, not knowing the terror they were about to face. They slowly made their approach, quickly noticing the eerie stillness from the Russian side. Russians would once again seize victory that day, pushing the Germans out of their stronghold. The battle forever going down in history as the attack of the dead men. Most of the men who fought that day would eventually perish. Their heroic last stand would turn the tides of the war. But it makes one think, maybe the Germans stumbled onto something that day. And don't think the Russians didn't notice as well. The mix of chemicals had turned them into something fierce. And you gotta wonder, did the Germans take the first steps in creating zombies? If you dig deep enough, it's even said that some of them were even biting the German soldiers. And if this is the case, they've had enough time to completely master the formula. And with all that's going on in the world today, you can never ask too many questions. And a lot of times, if you take a trip to the past, the future can be predicted. Now, I'm not saying they were really zombies, but do we really know? Stay woke. The horrifying secret of Disney's abandoned island theme park called Mowgli's Palace. In the late 1990s, North Carolina's government would claim eminent domain, displacing people for Disney's $30 million resort on the beach side of Emerald Island, known as Mowgli's Palace. They would tell the people living there that they were going to build a highway through it, but knowing all well what was really going on, the locals referred to it as Mickey Mouse Highway. But this is where it gets weird. As soon as Disney got it up and running, they literally abandoned it. Shortly after that, it became a ghost resort. You couldn't even find any references to it online. So is it true? Did this theme park really exist? After reading about the resort on the dark web, these were some of the questions rolling through Christopher Howard Wolf's mind. So the Reddit user, also known as Slime Beast, grabbed his camera and got ready for adventure. He was even able to dig up a map they sent him years ago in the mail. His story? After Reddit user Christopher Wolf reads about the abandoned theme park on the dark web, he decides to check it out for himself. By this time, the park was so overgrown, you could barely see it from a distance. As Wolf approaches the entrance, he notices the large wooden gates. The park had been so vandalized by looters, it was easy to go in unnoticed. He eagerly slips through a small crack in the front gate. But just as he steps foot on the grounds, camera in hand, he instantly knew something was off. He would make his way through building after building, taking pictures. What was once a beautiful theme park was covered in graffiti. It was very surreal, said Wolf. Everything was seemingly normal for the first half hour, 45 minutes. But then I hear what sounded like two people whispering.
I didn't believe it. I didn't know. Your father told you. I didn't know. Well, he told you. I didn't know. Help me. I didn't know. Your father told you.
The whispers continued from what sounded like around the corner. As I approached, "Hello, is anybody there?" They stopped. "Hello?" Nothing. I must be hearing things, thought Wolf. As I continued, I passed a large statue of Baloo the bear. As I looked it over, I almost felt sad as it was heavily damaged. Then, there it was, Mowgli's Palace. I observed it from a distance and instantly noticed a beautiful statue. It was a large snake. I couldn't believe how pristine it was, so I picked up my camera and zoomed in on it. As I was looking through my lens, it picked up its head. Startled, I continued to watch it. It didn't like my presence, but it wasn't scared. It slowly slithered off. This snake was by far the largest I'd ever seen. It had to be 30 to 40 feet long. I watched it slither away, then entered the palace. The words abandoned by Disney were all over. Every square inch was trashed. As I made my way through the palace, virtually everything was damaged, until I found a certain door. This door was in perfect condition, and it led to the basement. I made my way down there, and it opened up into a break room. This must have been the employee hangout. There was still rotten food on the shelves, and even uniforms like loincloths and more formal button-up shirts. I exited through another door at the back of the break room, and this opened up to another door. Over it, it said costume room. I was ecstatic, hoping to God I could find one. I walked up to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. There was virtually no way in, so I turned around and began making my way back. And as he's walking away, he hears a slight popping sound. He turns around and the door is slightly open. I was completely creeped out, but there was no way I couldn't go in there. As I entered the room, it was pitch black. He steps into the costume room. It's pitch black. He picks up his camera and clicks the flashlight on. He slowly begins to look around, and suddenly the lights flicker and then turn on. Jackpot! He looks around and there's full-size Disney costumes everywhere. The room is in a circle and they're lined up evenly spaced around the wall. He looks to his right and spots a Donald Duck. He makes his way towards it, and out of the corner of his eye, he notices a Mickey laying in the middle of the floor. Thinking nothing of it, he walks over to the Donald Duck and starts picking the head of the costume up. Then suddenly, something crashes to the ground. He glances down and it's a human skull. What the? And he turns to run, but as he does, he freezes in his track. The Mickey in the middle of the floor has sat up. His stomach falls to his feet.
Hey, wanna play? Hey, wanna play?
I was so frozen with fear, I couldn't even move. The door suddenly slams behind me. I feel my legs get weak and I'm about to pass out. But my adrenaline kicks in because I know if I pass out, I'm a goner. I turn back around to look at him and he stood up on his feet.
Come on, let's play.
What looks like blood begins to stream out of its mouth. It begins walking towards me as I'm frantically trying to open the door.
Where are you going, Christopher? You don't want to play? Want to take off my head?
I can hear his footsteps as he inches closer. As it lifts its head, I can hear grunting and moaning. Then the door flies open. As I'm running, I can hear the blood spilling on the floor. Chris gets out alive, never publishes or says a word. In 1957, the CIA quietly declassified a document claiming the cover-up of one of the greatest empires in the world's history. Here in blue, you can see that it covered most of Asia, and it was known as the Grand Tartary. The Tartarian reign dates all the way back to 1200 AD, and here you can see it in gold. It covered 3.1 million square miles at one point, and here you can see it even covered most of the Americas. Historical texts state that they were multicultural and had multiple religions. They were also a nation of science. There are claims that they had a way to sustain free energy for everybody. Some even believe they figured out the secret to longevity of life. These upper body statues of the Tartarian people say they lived longer than 100 years. Check out the dates, 1368 to 1507. Are they the real reason for the Great Wall of China? This picture was from the Turquoise Globe from 1744. This depicts the Great Wall of China, and it says, a wall of 400 leagues built between the bottoms of the mountains by the King of China against the incursions of the Tartars. Not the Mongolians, the Tartars. In history, for some reason, it stated the Mongolians were attempting to raid China, and that they looked like this. Above is a depiction of Genghis Khan and what we were taught that he looks like. And this is probably going to anger some people. But in real, Genghis Khan was white, and so was his wife. And I know, it sounds crazy, people, but look it up. It's true. I'll leave the link to the YouTube video in the comments. This is a world atlas of the 1800s. Here, Tartarian flag. The land of Tartary, represented by an owl. An owl. More owls. Owl on the dollar bill. You see them on this map dating back to the 1700s. Where they inhabit is highlighted in yellow. Asia, and almost all of North America and Canada. They even existed up through the 19th and 20th centuries. You can see their flags here. I also found it interesting that their nation was represented by an owl, and you still see this owl depicted to this day, OVO. The dollar bill even depicts owls. And for those of you that don't know, the Illuminati is represented by an owl. This ancient text, Empire de Tartary. It is believed that their nation was multicultural and multi-religion. They had free sustaining energy and had learned how to live in peace. This is one of their fortresses, shaped kind of like a star. Remind you of something? Check out our Statue of Liberty. They were architectural masters, but their history is buried. Why? This is the Book of Enoch, and the first story, the Book of the Watchers. For those of you that aren't familiar, the Book of Enoch was part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, found in 1946 and 47. It's an ancient Hebrew religious text that follows the story of Enoch, Noah's great-grandfather. The account was written in 200 to 300 BC, but the stories are said to have taken place before the Great Flood. In the first book, Enoch tells the story of the Watcher. Now, what exactly are the Watchers? As the name would suggest, the Watchers were tasked by the Lord to watch over Earth and humanity. They could literally see and hear everything. They were considered the messengers or the middle ground between earth and heaven. Enoch would describe them as angels, but they weren't necessarily angels in good standing with God. There were over 200 assigned watchers, and they watched over the children of men for years. They would observe as men multiplied and became obsessed with the beauty of their daughters. Eventually, they would grow tired of this arrogance, and they would decide to descend upon earth and take mortal wives to bear their children. After the 200 watchers would observe mankind boasting about the beauty of their daughters for years, they would descend upon earth and use them to bear their children. The leader of the watchers feared not all would agree with his idea, and that the punishment for such a great sin would all fall upon him. So he gathered all 10 chiefs of the watchers, and they made an oath not to abandon this plan. This oath would also bound them to one another, meaning if one got punished, they all did. So the watchers would leave their post, descend upon earth, and take mortal wives. The chief watchers, mainly Azazel, would share secrets forbidden to mankind. He would teach them how to make breastplates, sword, and shield, and would show them about the known metals of earth. They would teach them of jewelry and beautifying of the eyelids, and costly stone coloring tinctures, namely makeup. From there arose much godlessness. Eventually, this would lead to the Nephilim. These were giants born of watchers and mortal women, and it wasn't long before they would lose control of them. 3. So the watchers take mortal wives and have children. These are the Nephilim. The Nephilim are giants, and they're said they could be up to 1,000 feet tall. At first, the giants and humans were able to coexist. But eventually, the giants would turn, and they'd start pillaging and murdering humans. Between this and Watcher Azazel showing them of armor and sword, which would lead to war and battles among men. After for years watching this take place, archangels went to the Lord. And of course, the Lord would already have a plan. Each of them would get a specific task, and this would all lead to the end of days. Destroying everything was the only way to guarantee the Nephilim wouldn't survive. Then man could retake Earth without hindrance. Archangel Uriel would be tasked with informing Noah, letting him know that he would be the one to repopulate Earth. Raphael was to eliminate Azazel. Since he did the vast majority of teaching the humans to sin, Raphael was to open up a hole in the desert and cast him there. Part 4. Just a fair warning, this next video gets a little graphic, so if you're not into it, just keep scrolling. If you stuck around, good choice. This is the Russian sleep experiment of the 1940s. The objective was simple really, create a gas that could keep a soldier awake and alert much longer than the human body allows. All superpowers were running tests like this at the time because of World War II. The development of the gas was rushed. They were more focused on human trials at the time. So they selected 5 prisoners of war who were told falsely that they could go home if they did the experiments. They all eagerly agreed. Then they were put in a room where they would push the gas and oxygen through vents that would keep them awake. There were 5 beds, 1 for each of them, a cupboard full of books, a bathroom, and one-way glass watching the subjects, and they could talk to the researchers. Everything was normal for the first 3 or 4 days, but after that, it got dark quick. So after the 4th day of being awake, the subjects started to talk really dark, speaking about things that happened to them when they were young or during the war. This continued on for 4 or 5 more days, and the 9th day is when shit comes unhinged. One of the subjects loses it and starts walking back and forth screaming at the top of his lungs. And the whole time he's walking back and forth screaming, the other subjects are sitting in silence. He would walk back and forth screaming for a couple of days until finally he breaks his vocal cords. He didn't know exactly why he was screaming, but eventually he was paralyzed. Then a second subject started screaming, and that's when the other subjects covered the see-through glass. They would do this using water and pages from the books they had. They even used human waste. After blocking the glass, they broke all the microphones so the researchers couldn't hear. This went on for days. Okay, this may be a creepypasta, but if y'all don't think they were running these type of experiments in World War II, y'all need to wake up. And stay tuned, check out my next video. I got something coming after this. It's crazy real, and it's happening right now. So they let the silence go until day 15, and they finally open the door. When they get in, they cannot believe what they've done. 4 inches of water on the floor, they turned the faucets on and left them on. They were all sitting there emaciated, they had stopped eating, and they were actually ripping chunks of skin off themselves. Before the researchers went in, they shut off the gas, and I guess they were begging for them to turn it back on. Well, it's obvious they've had enough, so they tell soldiers to go in and grab them, take them to medical. In the process, one of the soldiers gets bit in the neck and bleeds to death. They realized 2 of them had passed away already, and the other 3 they took to medical. The whole time they were begging not to let them fall asleep, begging to have the gas back. When they sedated them, they all passed away. This is the legend of Helltown, USA, and the abandoned school bus. It was late January 1968 when a group of high schoolers was coming home from a field trip to the local ski resort. Everything was going along as planned, and the bus was full of excited chatter from students who had a great time but wanted to be home. Then, out of nowhere, the bus driver hits the brakes and begins to turn around. Curiously, the students peer out the window, and this is when they see an elderly woman who seems to be in a panic. And as the driver pulls up to her, he opens the door. "What's wrong, ma'am?" my grandson, he's seriously injured. He's at my house. We need your help." "Okay, ma'am, calm down. Where do you live?" "Just 2 drives up." "All right, hop in." Thank you. In an attempt to help, the bus driver turned down her driveway and began making his way towards her house. The driver continued down the old dirt track for what seemed like forever. That's when he got a bad feeling. The bus driver is just about to stop the bus when the old lady goes, "Oh, there's my house. Hurry." And at this time, the bus driver figures they're so close, he might as well see what's going on. And as they're closing on the last 100 feet to get to the house, one of the students is staring out the window when she spots a man in a suit creepily standing in the woods. "Hey, did you see that? Look," she says to her friend sitting next to her. Her friend looks over his shoulder and goes, "What? What do you see?" She looks back and he's gone. "I swear I just saw somebody, I swear it." Her friend goes, "Oh, you're just tired. Hopefully this gets over with soon." The bus driver finally pulls up to the house and stops. And the old lady in a panic, Hurry, he's inside." The bus driver runs off the bus, and as soon as he does, the old lady shuts the door and locks it behind him. "What the hell? What's going on?" The old lady turns around and smiles. She laughs evilly as the men in suits surround the bus. The bus driver gets off the school bus, and the old lady shuts the door and locks it. That's when he turns around. "Hey, what's going on? What are you doing?" He beats on the door. "What are you doing? Let me in." That's when some students start chiming in. "Hey, what's going on? Let him in." She turns, and instantly she looks different. Her eyes black, and her face pale. She begins low-key laughing under her breath. That's what she says. "Don't worry, kids. It'll all be over soon." Men in black suits began emerging from the woods, and they were chanting a satanic seance. The driver turns around and begins trying to fight them off, but they quickly overtake him. The students go into a frenzy, shouting and screaming, scared for their life. The men in suits surround the bus, beating on the side. As the old lady opens the door, she says, "Welcome to Helltown, my children." And the men in suits slowly filter down the bus, designating 1 man per each seat on both sides. This had the students absolutely terrified, but most of them were surprisingly kind of quiet from shock. When they finally lined up at every seat, they finished their seance, and suddenly the students were staring forward, almost zombie-like. "All right, kiddies, it's time to go on our new adventure. Follow the men in black." As each of them were slowly getting off the bus, one of the students, who was an athlete, accidentally tripped and fell. He hits the ground hard and it breaks whatever they have over him. He gets up in a sheer panic and just starts running. 2 of the men in suits were chasing him, but eventually gave up, as this kid was a track star. He ended up being the only witness who got away that night. After the kid that ran got away, the old lady chimes in and says, "Don't worry, he'll catch up with him soon." And that's when the men in black said their first words. Yeah, he'll catch up with him soon. They mumbled at each and every one of them. That's when the march through the dark and eerie woods began, lit by nothing but the full moon light. Throughout the whole march, you could hear what seemed like something crashing through the woods and following them. Eventually, they got to a place where the woods seemed to open up into a circle-like clearing, one of the only places where the moonlight shined through. They gathered them in a circle and began chanting. This time, the Wendigo knew it was his yearly feast. He hastily made it to the clearing and then stopped. The beast let out a loud cry, and the old lady snapped her fingers, removing the trance. The kids were never seen again. From that day on, the school bus was left there abandoned, and it is said that when tourists would come look through the windows, they could actually see the ghosts of the children who lost their lives that day. And it actually turns out the Wendigo had a much deeper history in Helltown than we ever thought. The government had actually captured him and started doing experiments much before they took over Helltown. And the only reason this story truly leaked out was the kid that escaped that day. The Wendigo never caught up to him. And it is said that there's actually still a Satanist cult living in Helltown. Recently, a journalist actually went to visit Helltown and had an encounter of her own. As she was walking through the woods, she spotted a couple, so frightened, she went back to her car. As she approached, she saw a bunch of them, peeking in her car windows, then they ran. This is the legend of Pan Am Flight 914. It was July 2nd, 1955, when Pan Am Flight 914 was scheduled to take off from its airport in New York. The routine flight to Miami was carrying 57 passengers and 4 crew members. As the plane took off, it seemed to be a normal flight for the passengers, but this proved to be far from the truth. About an hour or so after takeoff, the plane disappeared off the radar and never made it to Miami that day. Investigators searched endlessly and found nothing. So a few days later, they pronounced everybody dead. But this wouldn't be the end of the story. It was a normal day for Juan de la Carte, air traffic controller for Venezuela Caracas Airport. He was watching a scheduled plane on the radar when all of a sudden a blip showed up out of nowhere. Confused, he called them. "This is air traffic control from the Caracas Airport. May I ask who you are?" "Yes, sir. This is Pan Am Flight 914, scheduled to land in Miami at 9:55 a.m. After a short pause of confusion, Flight 914 chimes back in. "Tower, could you repeat your location?" Licarte replies, "You're approaching the airport in Caracas, Venezuela." The pilot looks at the co-pilot and says, "How the hell are we so far off?" He replies, "I don't know." What's crazy about this is to them, it had only been their 3-hour trip, their usual trip from New York to Miami. So the control tower went ahead and gave them the green light to land, and they watched as the plane flew in. Sure enough, 914 popped out of the clouds. As they watched the plane approach the airport, they were astonished because they could see the propellers. This told them it was old, because jet propulsion engines really didn't get popular until the 60s. So 914 lands safely and rolls to a stop. This is when De La Carte makes the wrong move. "914, do you know what day it is?" The captain replies, "Yeah, July 2nd, 1955. The captain has just replied he thinks it's July 2nd, 1955. After a long pause, Licarte replies, "No, Captain, it's September 9th, 1992. See, everybody on that plane didn't age a bit. Everybody looked the same. These claims are made by witnesses that were actually there on the ground that day. The captain replies, "Look!" After he finds out the date, the captain freaks out. He doesn't know what to do. "Alright, Tower, we're getting the hell out of here." So as one of the groundskeepers was approaching, the co-pilot had a window open. And as he waved him off, because he said they were going to take off, he dropped a calendar. This was one of the only pieces of evidence. And after the flight takes off, they're never to be seen again. Government comes in and takes all the footage and puts it in the vault. So again, all they had for evidence that day was that calendar that the co-pilot dropped, some videos, and some testimony from the crew, but they were told to hush hush, and they took the videos and put them in a vault, supposedly. This is what I read. So the beliefs are, what I see online, is that either UFOs were involved, or most likely a time lapse or a wormhole. The wormhole theory makes sense because it is believed they actually did fly through a small portion of the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle runs from San Juan, Puerto Rico, to Miami, Florida, which was their destination, to Bermuda, a small set of islands in the Atlantic. As you can see here on their route from New York to Miami, that they probably would get into a small portion of the Bermuda Triangle before they landed their plane. And recently, a guy in a single-engine plane claims he actually experienced the time-lapse of the wormhole in the Bermuda Triangle. Widow of 20 years has an intruder. Diana Smith, a 50-year-old widow, was home alone one night when she hears a loud thud. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceilings, hoping she was just hearing things. But then, Diana shoots out of bed, grabs her phone, and starts calling 911. "Operator, what's your emergency?" "I think I hear an intruder inside of my house," she says. "Please hurry, I'm so scared," she says. "All right, ma'am, just sit tight, and whatever you do, don't panic. We're sending somebody out." A huge sense of relief overtakes her, but she's still scared to death. She hears another thud. This time, they're coming up the stairs. "Oh my God, I think they're coming up to my room," she says. "Ma'am, be calm and sit tight." See, Diana just got this place way out in the boonies, so she didn't know anybody nearby that could help. Diana has been widowed for almost 20 years now. She's 50 years old, home alone, when an intruder breaks in. She's on the phone with 911 when the intruder starts up the stairs. "Oh my God, he's coming to my room." "Sit tight and stay quiet, ma'am. Help is on the way." "Okay." As soon as he says that, she sees somebody's shadow break through the cracks at the bottom of the door. Her heart leaps to her throat. "Thank God I locked the door before I called 911, she thought. After trying to open the door, the intruder stands there eerily. What seemed like ages, he walks away, and that's when she hears a big crash. What the hell was that, she thought. After 10 minutes or so, she heard nothing. I think he's gone. Should I check? No, ma'am. That's when she begins heading towards the door. And against her better judgment, she starts reaching for the handle. She leaves her room. As she reaches for the door, the operator is frantically telling her, "No, do not leave that room, ma'am. Sit tight." Just as he's saying that, she opens the door. It creaks as she enters the hallway. She peers left and right, nothing. She walks bare feet quietly down the hardwood floors. And that's when she notices the bathroom door is shut, and she thinks she can hear what may be running water. Perplexed, she reaches for the door handle, gives it a turn. "Ma'am, we'll be pulling in the driveway in 30 seconds. Ma'am, just sit tight and wait." She ignores his pleas, cracks the door open slowly, and that's when she sees him. A man sitting in the bathtub with cuts and bruises, and he looks emaciated. She quietly shuts the door and runs downstairs just as the cops arrive. "He's in the bathroom, he's in the bathroom." They run upstairs. "Freeze, freeze, freeze, put your hands in the air, hands in the air." The man seems so weak that he couldn't even turn around or react. So they yank him out of the tub, put him in cuffs, throw a towel over his head, and haul him downstairs. Diana stood there as he walked on by, not believing what just happened. As the cops were walking him by, a sense of peace warmed over Diana. They walked him over and sat him in the back of the ambulance, then called Diana. The cops watch her as she walks up slowly, eyes wide, almost in shock. She walks up, tears are rolling down her face, and the guards ask her what's going on. She doesn't answer and proceeds up to the man. The man has his head down in his hands. "Frank, is that you?" she says. The man picks his head up off his hands, still looking down. He looks up, and Diana faints. The intruder happened to be her husband, who disappeared over 20 years ago. He was just 30 years old at the time and looked the same. This is the unsolved mystery of the Zanetti train incident. On June 14, 1911, Italian railway company Zanetti would set up an ad campaign giving out free tickets to upper-class citizens of Rome for a sightseeing excursion. The excursion was set to take place a month later. A train with 3 cars would start from Rome and end up at the Lombardy Tunnel. The big day has arrived. The passengers boarded the train, eager to see the sights. Much like the Titanic, these people had no idea what they were walking into. Early on, everything was great. The sights were beautiful, the passengers happy. But as they approached the main attraction, the Lombardy Tunnel, the once excited chatter fell silent as there was an eerie stillness in the air. The passengers could see a dense fog rolling out of the tunnel. The closer they got, the more panic set in. Lights began flashing and electricity started to bolt all over the outside of the train. And just as we entered, the first car of our ill-fated train split open. Myself and another guy jumped off. "I heard an unclear humming sound as we approached the tunnel," said one witness. "As soon as we entered the tunnel, the cars became enveloped in white fog. People began shouting and screaming, thinking an accident was going to happen. That's when it suddenly seemed like the train was going in slow motion, and the front car split right in half. At this time, me and the other fella bailed, and we hit the ground hard. And that's when the train completely disappeared. It literally vanished. Witnesses say they saw the train entering the tunnel, but never saw it exit. Investigators would follow the entirety of the tracks and find nothing. And nobody could come up with any explanation. And this is where it gets weird. There are records of medieval monks in Medina spotting the 3-car train with people who were shaven and wearing black. This info was found at the records kept in Castisalia. These records were kept by a family called the Sagerno family. And that just so happened to be the last name of one of our witnesses who jumped. So after its visit back to medieval times where it was spotted by monastery monks, the Zanetti train went back to the future. In 1840, they ended up in Mexico. This information was discovered by one of the passengers' distant relatives. They found out in some hospital records that they admitted 104 patients for mental instability. It stated that these people were dressed funny and looked much different, claiming to be from the future. They said they departed from Rome this morning and they didn't know where they were. They should be on a train known as the Zanetti. At the time, the hospital wouldn't know any different, so they dubbed them all insane. But one thing the doctors couldn't figure out is why they were all telling the same story. The psychiatrist notes even stated that one of the passengers had a cigar box from 1907. This cigar box is kept in a museum in Mexico today. For info on the last sighting, the passengers got stuck in 1840 and went insane, but the train went on. On October 29, 1955, a USSR signalman from the Ukraine spotted the 3-car train. It was floating on the snow with no track. The signalman rubbed his eyes, not believing what he saw. But when he looked back up, there it was, real as day. Only thing is, this time, all the windows were closed, all the curtains were closed, and nobody was actually operating the train. It was just moving along on its own. Then, in 1991, it was apparently spotted again in Crimea. One witness even said that they could see the train actually run over hens on the tracks. And folklore states, at this moment, the signalman from the USSR jumped on the train, never to return. After seeing the ghost train, he became obsessed, eventually hunting it down, forever tying himself to the Zanetti train.